Hello, everyone. This is Deborah Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of 55 plus training sessions that will help you and your team avoid fraud, compliance fines, and bad vendor data. Or just sign up to get access to vendor process FAQs and to attend weekly drop-in live Q&A sessions. Visit training.deborahrrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. Move over business email compromise, or BEC. Now there is a new term, business identity compromise, or BIC. So what is it? Where did it come from? And what do you do about it? Keep listening. So welcome to episode 207. What is business identity compromise, or BIC, and how the FBI says you can identify it and mitigate it? So just to start with business email compromise, or BEC, let's define that. So depending on where you read about it, there can be many different definitions. They really all say the same thing, right? Fraudsters try to get you to transfer funds or divert your vendor's funds. But depending on where you read about it, that definition can restrict it to just the transfer of funds, as in wire transfers, which is what we all saw more of at the beginning of the whole fraud trend a few years back. Now, some definitions can include gift card scams too, because those are done via email. Or it can include, right, the fraudster pretending to be your vendor or leadership member that's asking you to change your vendor's bank account and divert funds. And sometimes when it's coming from the vendors, that definition is vendor impersonation fraud. So we've got all kinds of definitions from different folks, right? Some call this vendor impersonation fraud. Some call it change my bank account fraud. Some call it CEO fraud. But I think no matter what you call it, everyone understands that this type of scam is either diverting your company's funds or your vendor's funds to a fraudster via email. And just as we all got used to that and hopefully are putting authentication techniques, internal controls, or best practices in place to avoid it, now comes another one, right? Because fraudsters are always evolving. And that is business identity compromise, or BIC. Now, the FBI defined it in March of 2021 on their private industry notification. That number is 210310-1, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But they defined it as the use of content generation and manipulation tools to develop synthetic corporate personas or create a sophisticated emulation of an existing employee. They called it a newly defined cyber attack vector that is an evolution of business email compromise. Just what we needed. Now, fast forward to June of 2022, and the FBI issued a public service announcement, and that was alert number I-062822, and that PSA was warning of deepfakes and stolen PII utilized to apply for remote work positions. And I will put this as a link in the show notes. And they talked about deepfakes that includes a video or an image or recording convincingly altered and manipulated to misrepresent someone as doing or saying something that was not actually done or said. Now, we've all seen this, and I know I've reported on a few of them with other scams like crypto scams where they had videos. And I know one for sure was with Elon Musk and touting some crypto platform. And of course, that was a deep fake. And there were some other well-known folks as well. But this was to apply for jobs. Can you believe that? And with us now in the Great Resignation and the open or number of open jobs that need to be filled, this can be very troubling, especially for the positions or types of positions that were targeted as a part of this PSA. And what they said is that the remote work or work from home positions identified in these reports include information technology and computer programming, database and software related job functions. Notably, some reported positions include access to customer PII, financial data, corporate IT databases, and or proprietary information, which means that, all those phishing emails that we get where they try to get your login information so that they can log in as you and get that PII or, try to perpetrate a business email compromise scam. They're just now going directly to the source, right? And it looks like it's opened up because of this remote work or work from home environment that we're in today. And so they indicated that complaints report the use of voice spoofing or potentially voice deep fakes during the online interviews of the potential applicants, right? So they even went through the interview process. But what they did say is that the victims in those interviews indicated that the actions and lip movement of the interviewee on camera did not completely coordinate with the audio of the person speaking. Like at times when they coughed, sneezed, or other auditory actions didn't really align with what was prevented visually. Now, the victims also reported to the FBI that they found out that the PII, the personally identifiable information, they found out it was stolen because when they went through the pre-employment background, that's when they determined that some of the applicants' information belonged to another individual. Now, to bring this all together, I read an article on KnowBe4. It came out October 2nd. I will put a link to it, but they talk about or kind of summarize trend micro reports on stolen identities and deepfakes. And what they said is that there is enough content exposed on social media to create deepfake models for millions of people. People in every country, city, village, or particular social group have their social media just exposed to the world. And further, they indicate that all the technological pillars are in place. Attack implementation does not require significant investment, and attacks can be launched not just by national states and corporations, but by individuals and small criminal groups, which means that the technology is out there and just available. And just let me say that I remember seeing a YouTube video, and this wasn't malicious or fraudulent way of using this AI, but they were talking about, and they gave a demo and the website of how instead of facing like copyright or backlash because you're using someone's actual, identity and face or whatever in a video, you could go to this site and you could create a non-person, right, and use that person instead. Well, cyber criminals are using the same thing for these deep fakes. Okay, so now you might be thinking, what on earth can we do? So here are some tips that were within the PSA. And again, I will have a link to that in the show notes. But within that, there is a visual of a person with indicators of synthetic content or deep fakes identified. So visual indicators such as distortions, warping, or inconsistency in images and video may be an indicator of synthetic images. For example, distinct, consistent eye spacing and placement across a wide sample of synthetic images provides one indicator of synthetic content. Similar visual inconsistencies are typically present in synthetic video, often demonstrated by noticeable head and torso movements, as well as syncing issues between face and lip movement and any associated audio. Now, they did indicate that third-party research and for forensic organizations, as well as some reputable cybersecurity companies, can help you in the identification and evaluation of any suspected synthetic content if you have access to them. So those are some ways that you can identify it. They also talk about SIFT methodology, which encourages you to stop. So S, investigate the source. That's I. Find trusted coverage. That's F, and then trace the original content when consuming information online. Now, I talk about that, but I also, in my vendor master file tip of the week for last week, which was, I believe it was 9:30, I'll put a link to it. But I talked about two wild ways or creative ways that vendor master teams or vendor teams use to confirm bank account changes, right? Because you can't always contact folks on the phone or these vendors on the phone. Sometimes they are out of the country and it just doesn't work. And so what one of the folks that was on one of my webinars said they did is that they use Zoom. And when he said it at the time, I was like, that could be okay as long as they have their camera on and their audio on, right? Because we as accounts payable, we don't really know what these vendors look like or who they are, right? We most likely have not talked to them on the phone, right? That's why we're doing a Zoom call, because we can't reach them by phone. And so, but I thought, well, okay, they're coming on, they have their audio on, they have their video on, because there was a new scam alert that I reported probably last year where these fraudsters were pretending to be your boss and then set up this Zoom call or some type of a meeting platform call and then get on the meeting and say that their video didn't work or their audio didn't work. But that wasn't the case here. They were getting on, and I thought, I don't know if I have any issues with that, right? It was something that was just brought up. I hadn't really thought about it. But now thinking of it in this case, where it could just be a synthetic identity, right? Now I wish I would have said, well, did you check, were there any distortions? Were there any inconsistencies between what they were saying and how their mouth was moving, right? So that may be something, if you guys are having, doing these Zoom calls or some type of a call with a vendor, because for whatever reason you can't get them on the phone to do your validations or confirmation of bank changes, keep that in mind, because I had not thought of that. Anyway, you do want to check out that PSA because it did include more tips for good cyber hygiene to make sure that you are identifying what could be a potential synthetic identity or business identity compromise, or BIC. So make sure you check out the link in the show notes for that. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 207th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.